Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling to order this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville, and I invite everyone to rise and join Council in the singing of O Canada. Please be seated. Madam Clerk, I believe we have regrets from Councillor Duddick and Councillor Knoll, and otherwise we're all in our places. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Lapworth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A number of minutes on the agenda for this evening to be approved. I have a declaration of pecuniary interest as one of my income tax clients is an employee of ClubLink, and he actually works at Glen Abbey, and that would be the 2018 Budget Committee meeting of the 23rd day of November, and the item 5 of the same minutes, and I believe also the 5th meeting, regular session Budget Committee of December the 12th, where Glen Abbey is referenced in one form or another. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So you just won't participate in that vote, right? Thank you. All right, Council. We need a mover and seconder for confirmation of the minutes of the previous Council meetings of the regular session of Council on December 18th and December 20th, and the minutes of the Planning and Development session of Council on January 15th. Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Hutchins. All those in favor? And those minutes are confirmed. Now we need a mover and seconder. Let me see here. No, I beg your pardon. We now have public delegations on the Community Services meeting item 6. Madam Clerk, would you like to call the listed delegations?
The first listed delegation is Loretta Serafini, the owner of Wagaway.
Welcome, Ms. Serafini. Council looks forward to your information. And the trick here is to somehow get the microphone pointed at you.
How's this? Good?
You don't have to be really close to it. It just has to be pointed at you.
Is that okay?
Perfect.
I have something to be handed out. I have enough copies for everybody. I hope 25. Thank you. So, good evening. My name is Loretta Serafini. I'm a resident of the town of Oakville. I'm also a stakeholder in this matter that's up for discussion tonight because I have a licensed boarding kennel in the town of Oakville. I'm also a breeder of purebred Canadian Kennel Club registered Yorkshire Terriers, and I coordinate the rescue efforts of the Canadian Yorkshire Terrier Association across the country. Notwithstanding all of this, I did not receive notice, written or otherwise, of either of the 2 meetings that were held with respect to the matters on the table tonight. I happen to be outside of the catchment area for the delivery of the Oakville beaver, and I do not routinely check the Town of Oakville website for notices with respect to meetings. So these two meetings that have been held went completely unnoticed by me. I learned of the matter last Tuesday when one of our volunteers asked if I had attended a meeting the night before, and so I had to tell her, no, I didn't know anything about it. So on Tuesday, I came here immediately to the town of Oakville, and I went to the clerk's office. They were very helpful in bringing me up to speed on all the things that had been discussed and that were the matters that were being dealt with. And I also spoke to the author of the proposed bylaw amendment. And I've given you a copy of the ad that was in the Oakville Beaver, just so that you can see how it was described therein. I'm really disappointed that that ad does not have precise information regarding the nature of the amendments, the type of information that I think residents of the town of Oakville would need, they would need to know to decide, to help them decide whether they would have to attend the meeting or whether they had a stake involved. But regretfully, there's so many things that could have been written in that notice that were not. Anyway, so here are my concerns with respect to the proposed amendments to the bylaw. First of all, they contain setback restrictions, which actually affect me, believe it or not. Just a cursory look in the clerk's office, flipping through the bylaw, I could see that there were setback restrictions that were going to affect me. So I discussed this with one of the authors of the amendment, and I don't know if they're here tonight, but I did get a phone call telling me that they were going to propose an amendment so that I would be excluded, but I don't know if that happened. How would I know if that's happened? I don't know. Anyway, so that affects me directly, and it kind of is very disappointing that I wouldn't have received some kind of a notice about the meeting. There is also within the proposed amendment an attempt to limit further the number of pets that residents in Oakville can legally have. There's a further limit, which surprises me. I talked to staff about that, and they told me that 5 people spoke at the meeting that was held in March of 2017. 5 people came to speak to the proposed amendments. I don't know if they spoke directly to the limit, the new limit that's being proposed, but only 5 people were there. And then last week at the meeting, 3 people attended. They didn't necessarily speak, but 3 people in the town of Oakville actually attended the meeting last Monday night to voice their concerns or to listen to what had to be said. I have to think that more people would be there speaking to these proposed amendments if this notice in the Oakville Beaver said, a meeting to discuss further limits to the number of pets that residents in the town of Oakville can legally have. I mean, I got to think there'd be more than 3 people at that meeting. But when you have such a generic posting, interested organizations, foster homeowners, pet owners are invited to attend to learn more. I don't think this is as precise as it could have been. So I don't think that you have, as a council this evening, the very best advice that you could possibly be getting, the most representative, the most sensitive, the most sensible advice that you could be getting from your citizenry here. Also, the bylaw proposes to raise fees associated with pet ownership in the town of Oakville and fees that can be levied by the Oakville Milton Humane Society. Again, I think this could easily have said to discuss the raising of fees with respect to animal ownership in Oakville. I don't necessarily think that the cost is exorbitant, but I have in the report or in the meeting minutes, they do have 2017 fees, but they don't have 2016 fees and 2015 fees for me to adequately judge whether the raise is, high, for example, above the cost of inflation and things like that. So I can't properly judge, but to me the fees themselves don't appear to be exorbitant, but however, it could easily have been added in the notice that's in the Oakville Beaver. And finally, my concerns rest with where the proposed bylaw seeks to establish guidelines regarding what they're calling protective care that is offered by the Humane Society. They're defining protective care, for example, if something were to happen to one of the residents in Oakville, like maybe they got into a car accident or maybe there was a fire, they've been rushed to the hospital, they have a cat or a dog at home, or other pets, and presumably they need to be taken care of. There might not be anyone to take care of them, so the Humane Society can now go in and remove those pets to the shelter where specific instructions are given with respect to how they are to be handled. That is in Section 8 of my copy, Protective Care. It says here, protective care notice shall be posted for at least 48 hours prior to the sale or disposal or euthanasia of an animal unless for humane reasons. So what this section gives them the authority to do is to keep the dog or the cat or the pet for 10 days. And then after 10 days, they may dispose of that pet any way that they want. This is something new that's in the bylaw. There were no provisions for this in the other one. And this concerns me because it is possible for any one of us to be in these circumstances. And I would, like to think that that we would be a little bit more specific with them in terms of the instructions that we give them about what they are to do before they can dispose or euthanize for humane reasons this pet. One of the things I would suggest to you, for example, is as the coordinator of a rescue program, a national rescue program, we could, for example, mandate them to contact 2 or 3 rescue organizations before an animal is euthanized. And let me give you an example. What would they do with, say, a 10-year-old Yorkshire Terrier that they had just removed from somebody's condominium, that had no teeth and that maybe needed insulin shots? Would they euthanize that pet because their shelter is full of 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds that are much more likely to be adopted? Would they simply euthanize that pet because they don't have any other guidelines from us and their shelter is full? Well, I submit to you that I get calls, not every day, but every week, from shelters, from pounds, from municipal animal control organizations, asking me to go and collect a dog that they consider to be unadoptable, but that they think a rescue organization would be able to perhaps rehabilitate and rehome. If I get calls from organizations such as those, why don't I get calls from my own Humane Society asking me to see what I could do, or do I know anyone, or do I know an organization? They're actually, I didn't bring it tonight, but there's actually a book that's printed every year with information in Ontario of all the rescue organizations that are willing to take dogs. And some of them are breed-specific rescues like ours is, but some of them are just, the size of the dog, or maybe the, setters or golden retrievers, or just anything. And these organizations go out of their way to collect animals that are considered unadoptable by pounds and humane societies, and they rehab them, they rehabilitate them, they train them, they perhaps manage them correctly and get them into a place where they can be adopted by families in this province. And so I would urge council to perhaps add, we seem to be telling them how to do their job administratively. They have to collect dates, they have to collect reasons, they have to collect descriptions. But when it comes to euthanizing, we tell them, okay, if you want to euthanize the animal, go ahead. And I think that we should be a little bit more specific about the kinds of steps that they have to go through before they euthanize. And also it says here the notice has to be posted at least 48 hours. Posted where? Let's be more specific and tell them where they have to post these notices, so that give people an opportunity maybe to go in and rescue a dog that that could be rescued if they think it's not rescuable. We do. Anyway, so in summation, I would just like to caution this council that it can't make sensitive, sensible decisions with respect to the residents of Oakville if you don't have the right information, if you don't have correct information. And I don't think you do, because I don't think that enough people were made aware of some of the changes that you're proposing in this bylaw. I think your staff could have been very much more specific with an effort to get a greater citizen participation. You know, we have the power here to create a beautiful, livable community. We should be mandating our Humane Society to make every effort to preserve life if possible. And I just wished I'd had an opportunity to participate in this, and I actually hope that I still might. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information. Are there questions for the delegation? Councillor Elgar.
Thank you for coming tonight. Appreciate your input. I guess your house was there, or your paws was there years before you were circled by other houses. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm thinking. So did staff tell you you would be exempt?
No.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can get an answer for that. Now, as far as the number of dogs, if you're a business, would this bylaw wouldn't impact you, would it?
Perhaps in the area of licensing. It's very vague. I think the other bylaw that it replaces is more specific with respect to who's required to get a license. Obviously, as a breeder, my dogs do not have licenses. They do not, roam the streets. They're pretty self-contained and I'm pretty careful about protecting them. But, I mean, that would severely affect me. And right now, it's blank, it's silent on that issue.
Okay, so we'll see if we get clarification on that for you.
I'd appreciate that.
And the other issues, staff will get an answer for you on that. You didn't mention leashes. Do you have an opinion on the 2-meter leash or the 5-meter leash?
Okay, I have an opinion on retractable leashes.
Okay.
I think they should be outlawed. They're the worst possible thing you can possibly have on your dog. I have a basket of them at the kennel that I convince people to part with. But we don't use them. I mean, I don't even want to give them to the Humane Society because I'm so against them. It allows the dog to get so far away from you that you don't have control. And should you meet up with another dog, we assume that every dog that's on a leash walking with its owner is friendly, but that's not always the case. And as someone who has small dogs, toy dogs, 5 pounds, 6 pounds, our dogs are particularly vulnerable to dogs that are not being properly controlled, to dogs that have a little bit of an aggression issue and that are too far on the end of the leash for the owner to practically control. So 5 feet, 3 feet, I don't think it matters. Retractable leashes, I'm completely against.
I appreciate hearing your feedback on that. It's hard. One thing is even worse if there's no leash, but
Yes.
that's kind of, it's hard enough to control that.
Yeah, I mean, you turn the corner and there's a dog coming the other way and he's on one of these leashes and you're on one of these leashes and it's disaster.
Okay, thank you, and we'll get some answers from staff on your issues.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
We're not done. Councillor Hutchins? No. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Worship. Just a question, so for clarity's sake, because you're jumping to about 3 or 4 areas of concern,
Yes.
the process and so forth. But I want to go right to the protective care, Section 8 or number 8.
Yes.
Are you suggesting after that 10-day period that the responsibility would like to see in this bylaw with respect to the town providing next steps with respect to rescue organizations?
Yes, I would
referrals?
I would like to see it say something like, before euthanasia is considered, especially in protective, not on animals that have been turned over to the Humane Society, but where they've gone in and removed animals from somebody's residence. I would like to see them mandated to contact rescue organizations, say 3 rescue organizations, to see if they can find someone that would be interested in rehabilitating that little dog.
Thank you, and hopefully staff can comment on that too. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If there's no other questions, thank you very much for, Councillor Lischina.
Hi.
Thank you for coming today, Mrs. Serafini. Could you comment or at least clarify the section where you said about the leash length? So you're a trainer as well?
I'm not a trainer.
You're not a trainer?
I have my own dogs. I train my own dogs, but I don't train other people's dogs.
So my understanding is trainers recommend 2-meter leashes or 6 feet. Have you been told that before as well, or what's your comment on that?
I would say that it's not some. It's also it may depend on the breed of dog, the size of the dog, but it also depends on the owner, because some owners can have 2 feet foot leashes, but they would be just as threatening or dangerous as a 5-foot leash. Because when their dog gets into a tussle with another dog, they don't know what to do to control it. And it's like bedlam. Okay, the bigger dog usually wins. But, so I don't think it's just a question of the length of the leash. I think it's, education, information, control, training for the owner as well as the dog. I mean, you go for a walk in this beautiful community, you have trees, flowers, you want your dog to be able to sniff and enjoy the outdoors while you're taking him for a walk. So, do you want to restrict people to a 5-foot leash when they have a lovely trained animal that responds to their command, that listens to them? I don't know, I'm not prepared to go that far.
So just, could you also comment, you said the retractable leashes are not recommended.
No, I didn't say that. I said I don't like them. I don't recommend them.
Okay, so for someone who would not have a retractable leash and have it 5 meters long, how?
I'm sorry, 5 meters, or did you
Well,
say?
we're talking about a 2-meter length right now in the bylaw. So when you're saying when you have control of a dog, if you have a 4-meter leash or a 5-meter leash, that's not retractable, how much control, is it as easy to have control of the dog as well with that length?
No, but if you have a dog that sits when you say sit, then it doesn't matter what the length of the leash is. That's what I'm saying.
Councillor Lapworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming this evening and for your information. I've been very privileged to be on the board of the Humane Society for about the last 10 or 11 years, and one thing there is that the euthanizing rate is probably the lowest in the area, and we do have a special fund there that is supported by loving pet owners and people that donate to the society in Oakville, where I think it's called the Charlie Fund, where if an animal is injured on the street and is severely injured, then we have the money to have special surgery for that particular animal to bring it back to its normal, healthy life. So we do try and protect as much of that as we can, but just wanted you to know that.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's wonderful. However, when you're going into somebody's home and removing an animal because they're incapacitated, because they're in the hospital, maybe they're in a coma, maybe they've had an accident, maybe they're in, palliative care, I don't know. But you're going into their home and you're removing an animal, their beloved pet. And they are not around to say, if you can't find a home, euthanize it, or, if you can't find a home, call my cousin. They're not around to say that. So I think you have a greater degree of responsibility in the disposal of that animal to make sure that it's done in a sensitive and sensible way. And in this particular case, I think that we should mandate them. We should tell them, you should try to contact several rescue organizations to see if you can place this in somebody else's care rather than euthanize it because it's 10 years old and requires medication. And, the prospect of you adopting this dog out is low, but maybe somebody else can. That's all I'm saying.
That's a very, very good point, and I'm sure the society will take that into consideration. But the euthanizing rate is less than 5%, I understand, yeah.
Okay, but it's still a kill shelter, and there's a lot of shelters that are not kill shelters. But our Oakville Humane Society is a kill shelter.
Thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Norm Froud.
Mr. Froud, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Hello, good evening. Volume okay? Okay. There was a...
Chris will be right with you.
Okay. Not a minute. We can start. My name is Norm Froud. I moved my family to Oakville in 1988, owned 3 homes in that time, and have 2 married daughters with families now in their 2nd and 4th home, respectively. We love Oakville and all believe that it has been managed and grown in a mostly responsible manner. I'm providing input as a member of the public, as opposed to one of the other 3 stakeholders, rescue organization, foster homes, or pet owners. I'd also like to have it noted at the outset that I am a dog lover. I grew up with dogs, but because of my family and lifestyle, have not been an owner in my adult life. All of my siblings However, have continued to own dogs, and one still lives in Oakville. The only reason I feel compelled to speak is to add balance and possibly counter those that speak solely for themselves without full regard for what is in the community's best interest as a whole. My comments only relate to the staff's recommendations for changes to the town's leash law, and none of the other matters that are contained in that report. Some feel as though this amendment has been rushed. I can assure you it has not. My first connect with the town on this matter was approximately 5+ years ago, who immediately directed me to the Oakville Milton Humane Society, since they are contracted by the town to manage enforcement. On average, I have called them 2 to 3 times a year. On August 9th, 2016, I had my first meeting with Councillor Lapworth, who agreed to help me walk through the municipal administrative process. My comments will surround the bylaw, enforcement, and education. Under the bylaw, in Oakville, we have had an animal control bylaw in place for many years with little change. Look at this photo from the front page of the December issue of the Beaver. Over the past 6 years, the Beaver has run this kind of photo on its front page multiple times. I believe it represents the collective view of many town dog owners. The photo is cute and fun-loving. However, it also shows the bylaw being ignored as this dog is off-leash and running free in Bronte Heritage Waterfront Park. 2 things concerning our town's bylaw. The bylaw missed key definitions and our town has evolved. I believe the matter is simple and should not consume significant municipal resources. I am speaking for the tens of thousands of Oakville residents who do not own dogs and are afraid of dogs to varying degrees. I am speaking for the thousands of Oakville children who are not comfortable with dogs and may be too young or inexperienced to know of the potential dangers. And finally, I speak for the hundreds of respectful and law-abiding dog owners who find themselves walking their dogs and being challenged by owners with uncontrolled dogs off or on leash. Having said that, I am really speaking for my wife, my grandkids, and my siblings. In whatever way the bylaw is actually written, in the end, only one thing matters. Dog owners must maintain control of their animals at all times when in public spaces, and provide visual assurance to all others that the control is in place. The first and most obvious way to do this is with a visible and appropriate length of leash, excluding designated off-leash areas. With the exception of the most well-trained dogs, no dogs can be absolutely controlled at the end of a 15-foot extendable lead, which ultimately gives the dog a running distance of approximately 30 feet in any direction. All Oakville residents should be able to walk our sidewalks and town-managed trails without being accosted by a dog or trip over their leash. That being said, extendable leads should be banned, and the definition of an Oakville-approved lead should have it to a maximum length that assures everyone that their personal space is safe. Town staff are recommending a maximum 2-meter leash length. Personally, I think that just catches Oakville up to the other communities around us, but it is acceptable. Everyone should understand that unless dog control behavior changes in this town, there will continue to be public pressure to address it further, just as in the communities surrounding us with already well-established leash length laws. Enforcement. During our meetings, I was told by Councillor Lapworth that the Humane Society is self-funding. He also said that the Humane Society staff has increased over time, but not with enforcement officers. With this understanding, a business case should be able to be made for more enforcement officers, resulting in more bylaw infractions and more revenue, leading to continued self-funding. 2 summers ago, Oakville Milton Humane Society orchestrated at Councillor Lapworth's, you probably can't see that, direction, a zero-exception policy that was put in place for a defined period of time at 3 Oakville locations, Valley Ridge Park, Petro-Canada Park, and Bronte Heritage Waterfront Park. At what point did bylaw abidance become optional, that we would consider a zero-exception policy as a test case? Tolerance for bylaw infractions leads to continued abuse. Do the town's parking enforcement officers look the other way as they work overnight ticketing non-registered street parked cars? No. Since the desired outcome is a behavioral change to bylaw abidance, the only direction is to actively patrol and ticket all infractions. Fines should also be set at fees that make it uncomfortable for people to ignore. Think distracted driving and cell phone use. Education. Some dog owners know they are breaking the rules when they are not officially controlling their dog. But many simply just have no clue. They see their animal as cute and a family member with rights. The end game should be that no Oakville resident should have to be touched in any manner by any dog in any public space if they so wish, period. Dog owners need to be taught that this end is their responsibility. This education should start with the dog licensing process. There should also be a continuing communication program directed to all dog owners, licensed or not. The desired behavior needs to be reinforced and not forgotten. In conclusion, there are a number of animal control items included in the staff's report. I would encourage common sense to prevail, and regardless of how any of you feel about the other items, this leash law amendment should be accepted tonight. If this discussion needs to continue, I am prepared to offer my involvement, and just please let me know what I can do to be of service. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your information. Are there questions for the gentleman? Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
Next delegation is Beverly Bell.
Welcome, Ms. Bell. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, all. I'm on the other side of what the other people have said so far. First of all, I didn't hear about this whole leash law until about 3 days or maybe a week ago at most. I just casually canvassed a few of my doggy friends, and I know a lot of people with dogs. In fact, there are a lot of doggy people on my street and around the area. And I canvassed about 10 people, and not one of them knew about this leash law. So I feel, first of all, quite strongly that no one told us about anything. Now, having said that, I feel strongly that the town really has no business telling me and other dog owners what type of leash I can use. I have used both a regular leash and an extendable, and I personally find the extendable to be a far better tool to control my dog. All I need to do is keep my finger on the button, which I do. I hover my finger on the button and press it at any moment. It stops him immediately. With a regular leash, I have to pull my dog toward me and then wrap the leash around my hand. It's not easy and it's painful. Also, just because a leash is 6 foot long, it doesn't mean that the dog is under control. Leashes may be 6 feet and under and can be dropped, as can an extendable. Then the dog runs off and jumps on someone. What happens then? It's a 6-foot leash, so what? As for a dog going on people's private property, how does a 6-foot leash stop that? There are a few people who don't like dogs doing their business on their property. I can understand that, but they are in the minority. As long as I've had a dog two dogs for about 16 years now. 2 separate, one passed away. And I think I've had maybe one person tell me, they don't want the dog to go on their property. As long as you stoop and scoop, I personally have really had no problem with the people in my neighborhood. Just one more thing. A dog on a loose, short leash, which dog trainers recommend, can lunge just as easily as a dog on an extendable. Shortening the leash length does not automatically improve the behavior of someone who is an irresponsible dog walker. I feel this bylaw penalizes all of us responsible dog owners for the sins of a few. Thank you.
Thank you for your information. Are there questions? Thank you, ma'am. I think that completes our list of delegations. All right. Then, Council, that takes us to the standing committee reports. Councillor Elder.
Just wonder, is staff able to respond to the questions asked by the owner of Wagaway Kennels, to the questions she had to?
Good evening. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think I've captured some of them anyway. I believe the first question was around licensing and whether that would be applicable to Wagaway kennels. And there is an exemption in the bylaw for licensed businesses, so kennels that are licensed, they would be exempt from the bylaw. So it wouldn't be applicable to them. The second part of that was around the setbacks, and I believe before you tonight, you have an amendment to the bylaw. That section that was in the bylaw has been removed for two reasons. It actually should have been removed when the bylaw came to you in the first place, and if you read it, it actually is worded incorrectly, so it made no sense in the bylaw the way it was. The next question was around the shelter and euthanizing dogs. And Councillor Lapworth, you were correct. It's our shelter is it's under 5%. Dogs are not euthanized for overcrowding. So if a dog was brought in a situation, and really what we're speaking of are situations where there may have been a fire, there may have been an illness, for whatever reason, there's no next of kin available or nobody that can actually look after a dog. In those situations, the police have nothing to do. They can't leave a dog in a house like that because it's inhumane. So right now, they actually give it to our Humane Society to look after, although we have no regulations around that whatsoever. So what we're trying to do with this addition to the bylaw is put some regulations around that. So if it was brought in under those circumstances, the dog, even if the kennel was full, we wouldn't be euthanizing that dog. We would be doing something much like was described and looking at shelters, rescue agencies outside of the Humane Society to look after the dog. And that was actually, that has occurred and did occur earlier this year in a case involving some dogs that were brought in that we didn't have room for. It wasn't the appropriate housing for them, but they were taken outside to shelters. So those two questions, I believe, I don't know if there was another question in there that I missed.
No, I thank you. So the setbacks are not an issue at all?
The setbacks are not an issue.
The number of dogs that she is allowed to have is not on the table in this bylaw either?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the licensed kennels are still allowed to operate as they did before.
Okay, so she is fine there. I guess the only other question I would have is, do we have any way of controlling the 2-meter leashes, like to the retractable? Do we have, like, are we just playing that we can do something? Because to me, the issue we have is a lot of total on-leash dogs that I see running on the trails. Like, are we saying we're going to do something, but truly we really can't do anything?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the answer to that is a bit complex. Can we do something? Yes. I think what we need to do is establish what is the norm in Oakville. Right now, we say in control. A dog must be in control. That's a bit nebulous. I mean, that is from an officer's perspective, is only something that you can determine after a dog is bitten. We can say that it wasn't in control. But out on the street, it's almost impossible to determine in control. With the addition of a 2-meter limit on leashes, what we're saying is that if it's within that realm, it's in control unless something happens. It could still be determined to be out of, if it bites, that's still not legal. But the actual 2 meters gives an officer investigating, gives an officer patrolling a park, gives them something realistic they can look at and determine if somebody is actually within control in the bylaw.
I appreciate the answers. Thanks very much.
Councillor Adams.
I recognize maybe this is not exactly the right time, but we've got Mr. Barry up front. Can I ask him some questions that are not related to the delegations? Or do you want me to separate the item and speak then?
Why don't, we're just a millimeter away from considering the committee report, separating the item, and then you can ask any questions you want, and then procedure can catch up to your energy.
Your Worship, I will
that be?
separate the item under question.
So can I call, so all I'm going to do is call council's attention to the Community Services Committee report, and I've received a request by a councillor, and it only takes a request to separate this item. And now, Councillor Adams, you had questions for staff? Away you go.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you, so we've been talking about the leash length issue, and I wanted to ask you, why is it that in the terminology that we use for at large, we talk about means to be found in any place other than the owner's property and not under the control of any person? Why don't we say not on a leash?
Well, the only way that you can be in control is if you're on leash, otherwise you're at large. So it's a bit of a circular argument, but it does mean the same thing.
So we don't actually say anywhere that being in control means being on a leash.
No, in the bylaw as it's changed, there was specific wording in the previous bylaw. In this bylaw, what we've said is you can't be at large, and you have to be on a leash, and that leash can only be 2 meters.
So the bylaw presumes that being not at large means being on a leash.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not explicit, but it's assumed.
Correct.
And therefore, the 2 meter rule comes into play.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Next, Councillor Giddings.
Thank you. Further to Councillor Adams' question, under the control, so a dog with incredible recall and an owner that uses it, that wouldn't be considered under control?
Well, right now, that's a difficult question, because that's what we say, it has to be under control.
But you just mentioned that implies being tethered.
Well, the revisions we've made to the bylaw says it can't be at large, and so it has to be on a leash, and that leash can't be more than 2 meters. So that's under control. In the old bylaw, it said it had to be under control, therefore it did become blurry from the eyes of an enforcement officer.
It removes the ambiguity.
Sorry?
It removes the ambiguity.
It removes the ambiguity.
Thanks.
Yes.
Councillor Adams again. I've got some kind of eagerness here from Councillor Hutchins. And so we're into first time, second time. Councillor Hutchins?
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can't do something to add in Section 8 to the bylaw to make it sort of more mandatory that when animals are rescued and rather than euthanize them, we can actually reach out to the various other societies that potentially may look after them.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what I could suggest for that, rather than trying to draft something like that tonight, since our shelter doesn't euthanize animals, I'd be happy to take that away and come back with something to add on to the bylaw. That way we catch it right. I'd hate to draft something on the floor and not actually capture what we're hoping to do. But it's certainly something we can add in.
Well, do I make a motion to that effect, or is that something that we can follow up later?
Our normal custom is to accept the offer by staff, and they've never reneged on those promises when they give them, so you don't really need a motion. You'll get that in due course. Is there anything else?
Yes, I would actually like to make a motion to eliminate the 2 meter leash section in the definition. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because I come from a different culture in England where they don't have such leash laws, and it forces people to actually go out and look after their pets properly and forces them to train them. So you see dogs walking around all the time in the UK, and they go into pubs and they sit down and they're quiet and are perfectly under control, and they don't have a leash. I recognize that leashes over here is a method of control, but a 2 meter leash doesn't really help. A dog out of control, whether it's 2 meter or 10 meters, or 5 meters, I should say, not 10 meters, 5 meters, is still out of control. My partner was walking on a road, and she asked to pet a dog, and it jumped up and bit her in the shoulder, and the gentleman, it was on a 2 meter leash, 6 feet. So you have no real assurance here. And this is one more law that we're adding. And I feel that the Humane Society is going to receive a lot of antagonism because of this law. And it relies a lot on donations and so on. So I believe this is counterproductive. So I would like to make a motion to remove the 2 meter part of that and have it just read the other part.
So on page 3 of the 25-page bylaw, Councillor Hutchins is moving and looking for a seconder to remove the words "no longer than 2 meters in length," I assume, so that the definition of leash, which is the only place 2 meters occurs in the bylaw, so that the leash definition reads, "Leash means a line, rope, or tether attached to the collar or harness worn by an animal enough sufficient strength to lead or restrain the animal." And before we, Councillor Adams?
I'll second it, but I want to correct you. The 2 meters does show up elsewhere in the bylaw. It shows up on page 13 under the biting dog section.
Okay,
and
yes.
that piece would continue to be part of the bylaw.
So
a dog that is deemed to be a biting dog or a dog that is likely to attack somebody, as per one of our animal control officers, that piece would remain, and such a dog would have to use a 2 meter length leash.
Okay. I also noticed the clerk has called our attention to the fact that on another page, the tether definition is 3 meters, and the page 3 mentions tether. So that's under standards of care, item section 5. So there's a little bit of inconsistency that we might want to try to iron out there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what I'd suggest is, since tether is included in the definition of leash, we could remove the definition of tether. But if that were to go forward, what I would also recommend, since we're removing 2 meters from the definition, we would have to add back in the under control clause. So I would recommend, I do have a recommendation for that.
So, Council, I'd like to suggest that since it doesn't appear to be simple to do, that if you're not happy with a 2 meter leash length, that instead of amending it on the fly, you might want to refer this back for another cycle and perhaps get to where you want to get without any error. Is that something you want to think about doing? The mover and seconder, I think I'm talking to mostly. Councillor Adams?
Are you asking? I'll happily refer it. I'll give you a motion to refer it back to staff for further review of these items.
Okay, so refer takes precedence, and it's in order for him to move referral, but he still needs a seconder. And you're entitled to second it.
And your worship, I haven't dictated a specific time frame, so if it's more than a cycle, so be it.
All right, so we have a motion to refer the bylaw back to staff for these corrections or changes. I shouldn't call them corrections, for these changes. And I think we're also looking for the apparent contradictions to be ironed out. And does anyone want to speak to that, or shall I call the vote? Councillor Lapworth?
Yeah, I would agree to refer it back, but can we get some further input from the Humane Society as to the relevance of the 2 meter to the 5 meter, as to what the popular vote would be from the owners of the dogs here in Oakville? Is that possible?
I'm sure staff can do that too.
Yeah, and also, while I've got the floor, if I may, Mr. Barry mentioned about the animals coming in. We take in any animal that's injured, in the town of Oakville, and we don't have any specific funding for that. We fund that care from our own resources. Yeah. Thank you.
And we're all very, very impressed with the work of the Oakville Milton District Humane Society. I'll call the vote. All those in favor of referral? Any opposed? The item is referred. Can I have a motion and a seconder to approve the rest of the Community Services Committee report? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Hutchins. Shall I put the vote? All in favor? The committee report is adopted. On administrative services, we have a request to separate item 7. That's the council chamber renovations. And that request is from Councillor Elgar. Councillor Elgar?
Yes, thank you. Through Mayor Burton, I am still very concerned that we are spending $2 million for 2 new councillors to redo the council chambers. in which we spend on average an hour and a half in a week. That's basically what, throughout the year of 2017, I did it for every meeting councillors were at in this room. It averaged an hour and 30 minutes. I know we sent it back to staff to reduce the costs or take a look, and the benches alone, if you go back through, you'll see they were over $200,000 just for the benches and the millwork that was going to be done. And in fact, what has come back now was we have been able to cut a grand total of $21,000 from the $200,000 for the benching. And basically what we have done, we have taken this bench here, and we have cut 5.5 feet 2 inches off of it and pushed it against the wall, and we still have the other bench. So we have the same, from what I can figure out, the same measurement of benching across the place, except we've added a lot of cost by taking a saw and cutting the bench and then putting 2 new ends on it for support and everything. So I really felt that we could do an awful lot better. It wouldn't cost $200,000 to slice off 5.2 feet off all the benches on this side of the council chamber. And so I can't support, it's $2 million. We spent $197,000 on design. It's going to cost at $1,860,000. And all we can cut out of it so far is $91,000 in total, because we're going to take the projector from the south atrium and put it in this room. But the biggest shock I got today was when I learned that the light bulbs up in the ceiling, I've heard lots of jokes about how many people change a light bulb. I found out to change a bulb up there costs us $5,000 per bulb. That's what's in the plan. And I was a little shocked to see that. But apparently it takes a few days, have to close the council chambers, it takes a few days, and to build the scaffolding, because they haven't got a machine that can get up there. So like that's I'm pretty disappointed that ever happened, that we'd spend $5,000 changing a light bulb. But the new light bulbs are going to be LED and supposedly last 25 years. We'll see. I got to tell you, I really think we haven't done anything to take anything, any enamel or any shiny stuff off this Cadillac. It's more than we need. I understand the lighting is going to be so that the councillors have more natural lighting when the cameras are looking at them. I just can't, I cannot support it, and I would ask for a recorded vote on this, because I think there should be and has to be a lot of savings. Because when you think the previous addition was 1.1 million, but it was only 30% of the taxpayers' dollars. So of the 1.1, it was only 330,000 that was on the base of the taxpayer. It was covered by what was lot levies and DC charges, which had to be spent within a period of time. And I don't know, I know 330,000 is a lot different than, well, 2 million basically. We spent 197 already, but it's a total is 2. So anyhow, I will be not supporting this. I would have asked that it go back for another look at reasonableness. I thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Can I have a mover and seconder for item 7? Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Adams. A recorded vote has been requested. I will be supporting the motion to renovate the council chamber. This renovation is all in, including the money we spent on the design last year, comes to around $2 million. That's quite a contrast to the $3.5 million that we're spending without complaint to do essentially the same thing at the council chamber of the region of Halton. All those in favor of the motion, please rise to be named. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Mayor Burton, Councillor Hutchins, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Robinson, Councillor O'Meara. To be recorded against, please rise to be named. Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar. Item 7 is carried. Do we have a mover and seconder for the balance of the report? Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Giddings. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed to the balance of ASC? ASC is carried. Council, we now turn to the council meeting minutes item. The consent item addendum is what I'm calling your attention to. And we need a mover and seconder for the recommendation that the minutes of the Planning and Development Council meeting of November 6th, 2017 be approved as amended. Councillor Hutchins moving, Councillor Lischina seconds. All those in favor? And that is carried. Council, I need you to turn your mind to the confidential consent item that you have on blue paper. And the public motion is that council endorse the actions proposed to be taken as set out in the confidential report to the Regional Municipality of Halton from the Director of Legal Services and Corporate Counsel dated January 17th, 2018, being report number LPS 16-18, re CN's proposed Milton Logistics Project attached as Appendix B to this report. Councillor Elgar is moving, Councillor Adams is seconding. All those in favor? That is carried. Council, you also have a discussion item on your agenda, and the recommendation is that you receive the 2017 Strategic Plan Accomplishments and 2018 Key Initiatives Report from Strategy, Policy, and Communications Department. What's your pleasure? Councillor O'Meara moves, Councillor Chisholm seconds. Discussion? All in favor? That is carried. We now have a little bit of procedural nicety. We had a notice of motion from Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Robinson, which they wish to abandon or withdraw. And procedurally, what we actually need is to either defeat it or take a motion to withdraw it. Councillor O'Meara, I take it you'd like to move to withdraw it?
I would, Your Worship, please.
And Councillor Robinson, I assume, is seconding it?
If you could just spare me 1 second there, Your Worship, as well. I do apologize to council and to the clerks for this. We had some discussion on the issue. It was my intention that there would be unanimity on the street in order to go forward with this, and received a notice that, in fact, there was not unanimity as I had thought there was. So without that, I don't want to go forward with that. But my apologies to council and to the clerk and to the staff who put the time into this. So I would move the motion to withdraw the motion.
And don't feel badly, it's happened to all of us. It's one of the ways we learn. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and the motion is withdrawn. All right, we have a presentation on discussion item on the development charges background study, and the redoubtable Gary Scanlon is here to present it. Mr. Scanlon, council is looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Always a pleasure to be before you. Give me a moment. I'm not quite sure how to get it up there. Say the magic words. So this evening I'd like to make a presentation. It's a public meeting on Development Charges Act. As you probably are well aware, we've been moving through a discussion process with staff. We've been before the committee on a few occasions to have some discussions, and we've been proceeding through a dialogue with the development community. You can see here a summary of the process to date. We started from policy perspective approximately a year ago, and we've been moving through to the point we're at today. You can see we've had 4 stakeholder meetings. We've been engaging with them on policy matters, calculations, etc. The latest one being on January 25th. This evening's the public meeting. You can see that we're looking to issue an addendum through a lot of the discussions we've had. We've looked at some of the calculations, some of the what we've included, different dialogue, and there's actually some adjustments which would reduce some of the costs, and there's some adjustments that'll add to the cost. So tonight I'd like to just present a summary of those changes, so then when the addendum comes up, we've already filed the proposed charges and the changes, so there won't be a need to go through another public meeting prior to council's consideration of the bylaw. You can see we're looking for council's consideration on February 26th. Your current bylaw will expire on March 4th. So we're reaching a point of the expiry date, and we would hope to see you pass a new bylaw, so there's no gap in between passage and the new one. Public meetings, like any other public meeting, it's to make the presentation to the public. It's mandatory under the Development Charges Act, and we must release the document, the background study, and it must be in circulation for a minimum of 16 days. So the background study was released on December 22nd, and we will have circulated for more than 60 days by the time you consider the bylaw. Like any other public meeting, opening remarks, presentation, and then through council or the public, questions or perspectives can be advanced. We close the public meeting, and there will be no recommendations or resolutions other than to close the meeting and accept consideration of any comments given. Development charges are not new. We probably are over 60 years now having development charges in effect in Ontario. Back in the 1950s, you may have heard the term lot levies. That's when the development charges were actually imposed under the Planning Act. And we didn't really have stringent rules or regulations on how to do the calculations and such. That came about in 1989. And since that time, we've had what's been coined as development charges, and prior to that was lot levies. Now, these charges are to help municipalities recover costs associated with growth. So as growth occurs, you need to expand roads, you need to build more parks, more recreation facilities, etc. And this allows municipalities to recover those costs in order to ensure that the burden isn't placed on existing taxpayers, that is cost shared with the development. I just want to note that with the Development Charges Act, it allows certain costs to continue to be borne by the developers. That's called a local service. So normally within the subdivision, when they're building the sidewalks, the street lights, at the regional level, the water mains, the sewers, etc., those still remain their direct cost. The Development Charges Act looks at the services that are outside of the localized development. 1989, we had a Development Charges Act first put into place. It has been modified in 1997, and at that particular point, there was a number of reductions, deductions, limitations, which were introduced, which really don't allow for full cost recovery on the development charge. Many of the studies we've done, it basically provides somewhere in the range of about 75% of the growth-related costs. You can see here that there's been limitations on the services you can collect for, headquarters for the general administration of the municipality. So we've reduced the ability to expand portions of the town hall that deal with council, clerks, finance, etc. They've completely removed arts, culture, museum, and entertainment facilities. The only cultural facility they've allowed to continue is for libraries. Tourism, economic development's been removed, provision of a hospital. We used to provide for hospital grants in the development charge in order, because the province looks to get a minimum 33% contribution from the local area as a contribution towards those hospitals, and we used to look to recover that. That's been, since 1997, removed. Parkland acquisition, you'll see in the DC that we do provide for parkland development. So once we have land, we can put the trails, the landscaping, the amenities such as baseball diamonds and soccer pitches, but we cannot buy land for parks. All other services we can buy, but parkland's the only one we can't. And then for vehicles and equipment, you have to meet a test of those vehicles and equipment on average lasting 7 years or longer. This is to, I guess, ensure that it's major equipment and vehicles. It's not things for hammers or weed whippers, etc. So limitation on that. Without going through extensive review of the Act, in a simple form, the Act compels us to do these following steps. Take a look at the amount, type, and location of growth, and we use a 10-year planning horizon for most services. We can use any period of time for water, wastewater, storm, roads, police, and fire. So those are the ones that we can use any time horizon. Everything else we're limited to 10 years. You identify the servicing needs to accommodate that growth, and those servicing needs translate obviously into capital costs or infrastructure to accommodate the growth. When we have those costs, we deduct grant subsidies or other contributions. There's not many these days. 1997, there was lots of grants that were available by the senior levels of government. It's a little more constrained these days. We have to consider benefit to existing development. So is there any direct benefits arising? Most of the time, this is associated if I knock down a 5,000 square foot fire station and put up a 15,000 square foot fire station. Obviously, the first 5,000 is a replacement. So that'd be a good example of benefit to existing. So if there's a benefit by replacing, for the most point, the asset or addressing a significant problem within a servicing area, then that would be benefit to existing. For most of those services, all the 10-year services, we basically have a mandatory 10% deduction. We get to the end of the calculations, and the Act says deduct an extra 10%, and that must be paid for by taxpayers. Once again, that's contributing towards that not full cost recovery aspect. We have to do historic service standard calculations, so what we provided in the past provides a limitation into the future, and then we have to rationalize reserve funds. After all of those deductions, we end up with a net cost, which we must allocate between residential and then non-residential development, and basically divide it through by the growth forecast to come up with the charges. And I'll show you those charges in a moment. We had another modification. I talked about the 1997 modification. There was another one introduced and effective January 1st, 2016. This is referred to as Bill 73. So there was a number of changes. Some of them directly impact on Oakville. The first one's a minor thing, but it's worth noting that they made some adjustments to take some of the rules and regulations out of the Act and put it into the regulations. Really hasn't affected us. It's just allows the province, if they want to make further adjustments to services, that they can do it far more quickly now because they can do it through regulation change. Transit calculations is a significant change. It's a forward-looking service standard. We have to have ridership forecast. We must report on a very detailed analysis on asset management, et cetera. We've talked to the prior committee on some of these changes, and that's documented within this background study. The background study must examine area rating. It's not something with your services that we would recommend. Normally, water and wastewater are probably the best examples for area-specific charges, but they don't work well for things such as parks and recreation, et cetera. Once again, there's a write-up on that contained within the background study. Annual reporting has been broadened a bit to be, I guess, more transparent or more expressive. Those changes were implemented last year by your finance department. It's a provision for no additional levies. I'll talk about that in a minute, but what we've done through this process is enhance the description, clarified some issues with respect to what the developer's responsibilities are for constructing localized services in order to ensure there's minimal lapse in understanding between what we provide for in the DC and what the developer's responsibilities are. And then the next two items are basically, Minister obviously has broad powers with respect to deeming area-specific changes, or charges, I guess, but hasn't exercised that right as of yet. And then there was other minor housekeeping items to the Act. There's mandatory and discretionary exemptions. The mandatory aren't extensive. Basically, industrial buildings, if I have an existing building, I can expand it up to 50% and not have to pay the charge. There are some case law that's allowed us to basically draw a line in the sand and limit those expansions, and we've incorporated that into your bylaw. There's intensification provisions. If you have an existing single-family home, you can add up to 2 additional apartments, and as long as you don't more than double the size of that initial house, no charges are payable. If you've got medium or high-density development, you can add 1 additional unit. The last one just deals with local government. You cannot impose your charges on the region or the school boards. Similarly, their charges can't be imposed on any buildings that you construct. So it's a quid pro quo exemption. We then get into discretionary exemptions, and this is where you as a council turn your minds to whether further adjustments or exemptions should be warranted for something that's important to the town. That could translate into reducing the charge in whole or part for certain types of developments or certain classes. What we see most often is perhaps a reduced charge for industrial and sometimes exemptions for churches, places of worship. If the charge is going up significantly, you can consider phasing the charge in over the time. In fact, in this particular case, the development community is asking if you would consider that, and I'll address that in a moment again in the presentation. And the last one's redevelopment credits, and that's just to acknowledge that if I knock down my house, I should be allowed a period of time to replace it. Obviously, if it burns down or something, I'm just replacing what was there. So most municipalities provide for a 5-year time horizon in order to replace those types of buildings. And that's incorporated once again in your bylaw. These are your current exemptions, discretionary exemptions, and we're looking to continue with those, or at least that's how the draft bylaws have been developed at this particular point. Non-residential farm buildings have been excluded, public hospitals, universities, community college, provincial and federal crown agencies, conservation authority unless is exempt unless the buildings are used primarily for revenue generation or commercial purposes. Nonprofit entities, the square footage associated with them, places of worship, and then temporary buildings. So those are currently in your bylaw now, and we're continuing those. I talked a little bit about local service policy. I won't extend too far into it, but it's written up in the one of our appendices, and it deals with localized services for stormwater management, internal roads, sidewalks, streetlights, private entrances, and then parkland. Basically, what level of enhancement land has to achieve before the town will accept it. So there's basically clearing, grubbing, rough grading, fencing, etc. is the quality level you accept those donations of land. When we go through this process, there's always a balance that councils such as yourself seek to address. At the top of the oval, you can see that as we have growth, there's a need for additional services. Expanded roadways, more transit buses, expanded parks, recreation facilities, etc. And there's not a lot of magic. You either utilize development charges to the greatest extent available, or you don't have to have a development charge bylaw, but that would mean all of the costs then go over onto property taxes or user rates. So there's not a lot of wiggle room within this. As you have development, costs are rising, and you have to balance how you wish to recover those costs, either through wholly or partially development charges or through other rates or user fees. The growth forecast generally is summarized here. I would just note that this is meets with the region's best planning estimates, taking us out to 2031. I know they're embarking on an updated process that will probably take us out to 2041, but right now we've limited ourselves because of servicing. It only looks out to 2031, so we've limited the forecast to that time horizon. That provides for about, in 10-year forecast, about 17,000 units or about 42,000 people, or over the longer term to 2031, about 21,000 units and about 49,000 people. The non-residential square footage, the commercial, industrial, institutional square footage is shown there at about 12.7 million square feet and 16.3 over the 10 and 15-year period. Your current charges, you can see the services that are included. Services related to highway is basically roads, sidewalks, public works, sidewalks, trails, et cetera. You have transit services, fire, municipal parking, parks and rec, library, and general government really reflects studies, growth-related studies. So you can see the lion's portion is your roads and related. That's about 60%, and parks and rec another 30%, and the residual is in the rest of the services. You can see on non-residential, it's $10.62 per square foot. And we've got different categories. We've got singles, then we've got medium density, multiples, townhouses, 2 different size apartments, and then very small special care dwellings. We've continued with the exact same services this time around, and I'll show you the charges in a moment. What I wanted to note was from the release of this document, there's been some modifications, and I'll just very quickly, they're really summarized here, but I'll just touch on them quickly. For AT, for cycle lanes, routes, pathways, sidewalk modifications, et cetera. We had originally put in about $41 million worth of costs. Taking a look at that relative to some of the broader projects we had, it was a bit of a double count. So we've actually reduced the charges, or the cost down to about 28.7 million, and a little bit goes into post-period. But we've also, there's been some additional grants that we've associated with some of those works. AT studies, basically we bumped it from about 1 million up to 1.4. There's 5 projects where we revised the benefit to existing. So this is, in some cases, we've increased it. That's the first project. The rest of it, we've reduced it from 30% down to 0. There's been some revisions in grants, basically contributions from Metrolinks. We've, for these particular projects, we've actually, the first 2, we've reduced contributions from about 17 million to 12.5 and 11 to 8. And then there's been a slight increase in the amount allocated to the AT Crossing Project 76. And then there was two additional projects related to Burnham Thorpe. There's the east and west section. It's been included. It's a gateway road, so it's been actually included as part of the DC. And you can see we've added about $25 million. We've added about $31 million. And then with the deductions, there's about 26 million included now in the DC. Minor revisions to transit. We had some updated, modal or trip generation information, locations was updated, and that caused a little bit of a revision to the transit. And then we've made some adjustments to, not much, in the growth-related studies. So and this is the updated charge. We'd be looking at a charge of about $33,700 for a single and semi-detached unit. Medium density, about 24,500, and then apartments between 11 and 18,000. Non-residential square footage per square foot is $10.27. And just so that you can see the original bylaw that's in place today, that's $25,300. The original calculations that's in this document is $33,200, and you can see the net impact with the adjustments we put forth brings it to just under $33,700. Now, I want to emphasize that I wanted to bring it out in today's public meeting, full disclosure, but there will be an addendum report, but I wanted to make sure it's in the public meeting so we don't have to have another public meeting between now and bylaw adoption. And on the non-residential, you can see from $10.62, we've actually dropped to $10.27 for commercial, industrial, institutional charges. Just a couple of other matters that were brought up through the process. There was, and I've noted this, there was a request from the development community that council consider phasing in. The charge is going, as I say, up by about $7,000 from its current $25,000 range. So they were asking that at least there be some consideration. Some of them have identified that they pre-sold some units. and they at least want a period of time to allow for that to be, those units to be built and not have to pay the charge. That's for council to consider. In the discussions we've had with staff, it's a balance between trying to recognize where they're at, but on the other side, any reduction basically is a loss of revenue that has to be picked up by town funds. So that's something you have to balance, is the revenue with the with their request. The other thing is just building permit issuance. There's always a transitional thing. If we pass the bylaw on a certain date, there's building permits that are in progress. So the normal process is, if you have a completed application just prior to the bylaw adoption, that would be considered complete. Generally, it's about 10 days for singles, I think 20 days for medium density, and maybe a little bit longer for high density to consider that. So that's the norm, and that's been the practice in the past, and we just wanted to clarify that would be addressed in normal course. Last couple of slides is just to compare the present charges versus the updated calculated charges relative to other areas in the GTA. The highest charge is at the very left, and that's the charge for Toronto. They've just introduced a proposed charge. They were running around $40,000 for a single detached unit. Their proposed charge now takes them up to I think about $86,000. So quite a jump in their particular case. One of the large drivers is the transit, their subway system. So that accounts for about $24,000 of their charge. As you can see, as we move across, there's the Markham, the Mississauga, the Brampton, and then Oakville. We actually have two charges for Oakville, and that's as a result of the region. The region has a built boundary charge and then a higher charge for the Greenfield area. So that denotes the higher charges on the left. That's the Greenfield, and the lower charge on the right would be the built boundary. So you can see the position. The orange is the current, and the blue is the updated recommended charges. So that's the residential. You can see, I just note the red is the region, the green is your particular charges, and the blue is the education. So those are the charges for the two school boards. If we look at commercial, you can see you're in about the same position. The recommended, there's actually a reduction in the recommended charges for commercial. The highest rate now is Markham, running at about $54 a square foot. All of your charges combined are running at about $45 a square foot. Industrial is lower and generally running just over $20 a square foot. As I say, that completes my presentation. We have two other items in next steps. The addendum report will be released within the week. That'll be on the website, and that'll be sent to all the stakeholders that have been participating in our discussions. And then council, if there's any further comments or whatever, and you'll consider any comments at tonight's meeting, the bylaw and the recommended charges will be before you on February 26th.
Thank you very much. You have earned a question from Councillor Elgar at least, and I guess I can't resist saying, oh gee, I wondered when Toronto was going to get tired of bleeding itself by not collecting as much as it should. Councillor Elgar.
Yeah, thank you very much. A fantastic presentation. Is it going to be available to the town to put it online, the whole presentation that you showed us tonight?
Yes.
I'd appreciate that. One slide is missing, and I'm just wondering whether you could throw it into the deck. It has to do with how much in dollars the residents are subsidizing the development industry today, and going forward with your numbers to show on an annual basis how much we are subsidizing. Because I think I heard you say the word 75% is basically what is covered. So the shortfall, those are the existing taxpayers, right?
Right.
Because I think, and also you mentioned the transition period. I'm just curious, you're not suggesting we enter into a transition period, are you?
I don't, but in discussions with the staff, I mean, I don't believe that that's what they're recommending. It's the phase-in. I don't think that's the recommendation of staff.
Okay, I appreciate hearing that. Yeah, because I got concerned when I heard that. So I thought, because after listening to a CBC talk show last week, listening to a person who bought a house in Whitby in phase 1, and the price has gone down $70,000 for the exact same house, the size of the lot and everything. And then they talked to the development industry, and they weren't looking at changing the numbers at all. They said that's the way things fall. Thank you. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing the presentation.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, we will provide that information. I think this package has to stand alone, but we can add an additional slide that expresses what you're asking for. I don't want to modify the public meeting presentation, but we'll add that additional information that you've requested.
I really appreciate that. I think, we've come a long way with opening the residents' eyes as to, the game that we need the development to keep our taxes down. And it doesn't seem to be working based on what I'm hearing, and it never has. So thank you for that.
Councillor Adams.
Councillor Elgar asked every question I was going to ask. Thank you. I mean, despite the fact that we're working very hard to maximize the development charges to the very maximum allowable under the Development Charges Act, there's still millions of dollars that are being missed and lost as a result of the way the Act is set up. So I appreciate all of those questions. So I look forward to the presentation being provided to us, as well as the figures being added that Councillor Elgar was speaking about.
Well, Council, we're being taped and recorded, and we'll always be available. And it's simple math. $33,000 is 75% of $44,000. The difference is $11,000 a unit. So there's your handy number. And I'm pretty sure everybody in Oakville can do that math.
I think they'd like to see the number.
Well, you can see it now. It's 11. All right, Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just curious about the possibility of this being appealed eventually. Would that be done under the new OMB?
My understanding is, through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it'll be, still the continuing process will be through whatever the new Ontario Municipal Board name is. It'll continue through that process.
And is there anything that has changed that would be in a municipality's favor under the changes that happened in the new?
No, all of the changes appear to be really on the Planning Act, the process and such. Nothing has changed in the development charge.
And then would this, and again, I'm just going down this road, if it is appealed, would it have to get in the back of the queue behind those planning applications, or is this a separate stream that addresses the Development Charge Act?
Normally what happens is if there's an appeal, you understand, you try and vet how much time is going to be needed. Sometimes it's a week, sometimes it can be 4 to 6 weeks. Based on that, then it's all up to the board on availability and scheduling.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor, you might be helped a little bit to understand what we charge if we're under appeal while we're under appeal. Which of you wants to field that?
The charge, the bylaw that you adopt is the charge that is in place until the board directs something different.
Does that reassure you any? Makes you feel better? Okay. Would two of you like to move and second receipt of the information after we see if there's any members of the public with information for the committee, for the council? Going once, going twice. No interest. I saw a hand over here and a hand over here. Councillor Giddings and Councillor Elgar, all in favor, and the item is received. We have no more confidential discussion item. We have the Development Charges Steering Committee minutes to receive. Two of you like to do that. Councillor Hutchins and Councillor Adams, all in favor, and that's carried. You have your information items, the status of outstanding issues, both of them circulated electronically. I believe there is a notice of Councillor Robinson.
Your Worship, I just had a question on the status of outstanding issues. May I go ahead?
Yes.
Sorry. It's page 19 of our agenda, and it's item number 2 at the bottom. Request for a report by council 3 years ago that staff be requested to report back to council on the timing and type of community improvement plan and funding sources that may be appropriate for Bronte Village following the conclusion of the growth area review and livable Oakville plan policy update for Bronte Village. Now, I realize we're not quite finished yet, but it seems to me that 3 years is quite a long time to be waiting for some information, and I'm wondering if we could get some kind of an interim response to that request.
Well, the item you just read said that it was to follow the completion of this work.
I know that, but that's 3 years ago.
Well, we're about to finish that work.
Well.
Anyway, Commissioner, what would you like to say?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We need to finish the growth plan review for the Bronte area so that we have a clear understanding of the policies there in order to build the community improvement policies. So one definitely has to be finished before we start the next component of it.
So there's no such thing as an interim report or anything like that? I keep saying 3 years is a long time.
It is a long time, but we did take a report forward on community improvement policies and how you could apply them. That would be, I think, as far as we could go on an interim report. That was brought forward just before the Kerr Street pilot project started. And that gave an introduction to how we could apply a community improvement to a particular area. But actually implementing anything on the Bronte area, we have to have the new policies in place in order to be able to do that.
Councillor, would you like that previous report recirculated for your interest?
Probably be a good idea, maybe just for myself. I'm not sure if the rest want it or not.
All righty.
Thanks.
We will have that recirculated.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So under new business, so I have a request for report, but that's another couple steps down the agenda list here. I'm looking for notices of motion or emergency congratulatory or condolence items, and not seeing one, so I have one. And this is a proclamation that I have issued. Whereas on Sunday, January 29th, 2017, a year ago, a gunman carried out an act of terrorism at the Centre Culturel Islamique de Québec, where men, women, and children were gathered for night prayers. And whereas this savage attack left 6 people dead and 19 other people wounded. And whereas Oakville believes that Islamophobia, like all other forms of racism, hate, xenophobia, and bigotry, has no place in Canada, therefore I, Mayor Rob Burton, on this, the 1-year anniversary of the tragic violence against members of the Islamic Cultural Centre of Quebec, hereby proclaim January 29th, 2018 as a day of remembrance and action on Islamophobia. And I do that on behalf of our entire town. I know all of us were horrified by those events. Now we have a request for report moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Lischina, entitled Public Amenities at 1229 White Oaks Boulevard. And the request is that staff report on options to provide public amenities such as picnic tables, children's playground equipment, and gardens on the former police station site at 1229 White Oaks Boulevard, adjacent to Town Hall. Is there, by show of hands, is there consent to order this report? And that report is ordered. Thank you. Are there any regional reports or question period regarding town boards and advisory committees? I see none. We've dealt with requests for reports. So we need a mover and seconder for consideration of reading of the bylaws 2018-3, -9, and 10. Sorry, not 10, 23. I even have an X through 10 and a circle around 23. I can't account for why I said 10. 3, 9, and 23, as listed in the agenda. Although I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Hutchins, Councillor Grant, thank you very much. All in favor? The bylaws are adopted. That completes our work. Thank you very much for your time and attention. It's been great working with you, and that adjourns our meeting.